Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I take the great pleasure in welcoming all the analysts, which have turned up so numerously to our seat. Thank you very much for coming to the presentation for the first semester of 2017. We also welcome everyone visiting us online. The hosts of today's meeting are, as usual, President Baranowski and CEO Emil Wojtowicz. My name is Prostowski, Investor Relationship Manager. Without further ado, I'm giving the floor over to the board. After the presentation, you're all invited to ask any questions you like. The questions can be sent online by email or through the forum. Over to you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for us to see such a large turnout this time. Welcome everyone again, those present here in person as well as online. We'd like to share with you our accomplishments for the first half of 2017. To start with, we need to emphasize that we're continuing the trend of power generation from the first quarter, the 20% increase of production from Bełchatów, and this emphasizes the role of lignite in the Polish power gen system. It's to be emphasized that lignite is still the cheapest energy source in Poland when it's used in a well-thought and economically effective manner. It's just the efficiency of the generation that we have in view while modernizing units 1, 2, 3 in Turów. The modern conventional power generation is power gen that has a sustainable impact on the natural environment and also characterized by the high efficiency of generation and disposability. PGE wants to be its leader. The modernized blocks in Turów must find their place in the competitive market. This is a guarantee of the stability of their functioning and what follows the stability of energy supplies. This makes a difference under the Polish conditions, where we can see a consistent growth in the demand for electricity, which should be also expected in the years to come. And by the way, we can also note that we've noted a next peak in the demand, this time in the summer period on August the 1st. The very growth in energy use can be seen by the results of our distribution, which accounted for a 3% increase in Q2 2017 as compared to the increase in the country of almost 2%. A couple of words about the most important events of the previous period. First of all, we've kept our word when we said at the previous conference that we would immediately sign a contract to buy the Polish EDF assets. Right now we are expecting the decision of the antitrust Commission and the ministers of energy. So that's so much as we can say that, but we believe in a speedy resolution of this issue, which would allow us to intensify the work and the integration of our new assets as part of PGE Group. This makes a difference for us, especially in conjunction with our ambitious plans vis-a-vis the Polish heating market. The strategy of this growth should be announced prior to the ensuing results, with the proviso that the process of EDF takeover would finish by the end of September, but this is a thing which is not quite under our control. In July, we communicated a recommendation of the Investment Committee of PGE about the most efficient technology for the investment in Dolna Odra power plant. Under the current realities, the most efficient solution would be to build a lignite-fired 500 megawatt monoblock hard coal-fired monoblock. However, we are analyzing the regulatory and market changes. Other alternatives in this locality would be going for multi-fuel solution, gas, or the modernization of the current blocks. We will be informing you about the ensuing events, about changing the face of our generation and working on new technologies. We've established a new venture fund, PGE Ventures, to support startups supporting the PGE's activity. We assume providing about 25 million zlotys per annum to this goal, staying in the innovation stream. We've also established PGE Nowa Energia, New Energies, company, which is supposed to be an accelerator for projects at their early stage. We are continuing our involvement in electromobility, developing new electrical cars, charging stations, which is just now being dealt with by PGE Nowa Energia. We're also preparing a car-sharing offer for electric cars. The first such cars are already being tested in strategic projects. The Apollo project has exceeded an 80% of total advancement at the end of July. The advancement is of exactly 82%. As regards Unit 5, the turbo set is almost being finished, and at Unit 6 we're preparing the tightness test for the boiler's pressure systems. We've finished the technological startup run of the greatest accompanying investment, which is the water treatment plant. Towards the end of August, this plant is supposed to be commissioned. The so far expenditure on Apollo 2 at the end of the first semester have exceeded a sum of 7.6 billion zlotys. As regards the building of the unit in Turów, it is done as scheduled. You can see in this presentation that the work in the construction on the cooling tower shell, the advancement of the works has exceeded 30%. These are our most important projects, but not the only ones that we're accomplishing. Of course, you'd also need to mention a development project which we are carrying out in Rzeszów, which is a project for the waste treatment installation to recover also energy. At the same time, we're also carrying out modernization in our units in Turów, Pomorzany, and Bydgoszcz. We're also expanding and modernizing our distribution infrastructure countrywide. The pilot system of the smart measuring system in Łódź, in Augustów, has entered the final stage. The customers and the employees of our distribution branches can already hopefully see the first positive effects of the implementation of AMI meters. The operating and financial results will be presented by Mr. Emil Wojtowicz, and I'm giving the floor over to him. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of words about the energy market. To start with, the second quarter meant an increase of both the consumption as well as production generation in the country. However, to a lesser extent than in Q1, these increases were smaller, but still higher than the average growth rate in the next years. As regards the interchange with the country, due to the lower prices in the north and east, import to Poland predominated. However, this import was still lower than in the first semester of the previous year. The prices, the average price that our group has realized in the wholesale market was 163 zlotys, and that's the same amount in Q1 as well as in the whole semester. In the forward market, we can see an increase as compared to the same period of the first quarter, and we also see an increase of Q2 versus Q1. The average energy price in the band for the next year was of 160 zlotys, in Q2 163 zlotys. Analysts can see this as increased prices of coal that will impact the energy prices, as well as some regulatory factors such as possible changes in the operating reserve of power or the water law. As regards the volumes of energy, as the CEO mentioned, it was a very good semester and a very good Q2. We are talking about an increase by almost 1.5 terawatt hour. But this is particularly important for us, that we're increasing our lignite-based generation, which is a lower cost fuel for us, that gives us a higher margin. And by virtue of the same, we're also decreasing slightly the use of hard coal. Whereas the lower production in Q2 versus Q1 stemmed from a lower demand, and also the fact that we're taking advantage of the period out of winter to do some modernization and repairs and maintenance works. As regards the financials, what makes us particularly proud of is that EBITDA is so high at the level of almost 3.4 billion. And what's important is that this semester adjusted EBITDA is practically equal to reported EBITDA, something that we didn't have in the previous years. So we no longer have revenues due to LCTs. So this is such a level of earnings that we perceive as recurring, and we will be willing to maintain. Just to remind you, in the base period Q1 2016, our results were also impacted by the provision for eolic assets. Here we're talking about 800 roughly million, which also impacted the perception of those results at the EBIT levels. Without the adjustment, the results were also good, but we're not talking about the doubling of the results. To compare the results of Q2 versus Q1, we can see clearly that our business is subject to a certain seasonality. The cold quarters tend to have higher revenues and volumes than the warmer seasons, and it also translates into our earnings. In Q1, EBITDA amounted to roughly 2 billion. In Q2, almost 1.5 billion. So that's 500 million lower. As we look at our core segment, conventional power generation, their EBITDA is 400 million lower on a quarter-to-quarter basis, with a decrease by about 600, and the costs only dropped by some 300 million. This missing 100 million, the missing 100 million was roughly in Q1. We still had the revenues from LCTs. Shall I call them court-based LCTs, which we did not have in Q2. Now that's a repetition of what we talked about both today as well as in the previous conference. The main EBITDA value drivers are the increases of the volumes. That's almost by 400 billion. That increased our EBITDA by almost 400 million zlotys. Of course, you have to take into account that the increase in the volume also meant an increase in CO2 emissions and the purchase of the next emission rights, which also lowered our EBITDA by almost 90 million. Even though the volume grew, the different fuel structure meant that our hard coal costs did not increase, they actually dropped, and this is mostly an effect of the lower effect of the hard coal based generation decrease. The same is true for biomass. We are also not increasing biomass. The increased volumes in terms of distribution, which was mentioned by the CEO, also are also visible in on the EBITDA. We're talking here about an increase by 100 million. Passing on to the operating indicators, a couple of words here. The availability and the capacity factor in Q2 was slightly lower than in Q1. We're talking here also about a smaller demand for energy and the maintenance works which were carried out in Q2. Which you can see particularly in terms of hard coal, where the maintenance works both in Dolna Odra and in Opole meant that the capacity factor in Q2 was significantly lower than in prior year. As we look at the wind generation assets, here you can see what a great impact nature has on it. Weather conditions, despite the slightly lower availability, simply speaking, there was more wind, the wind was more favorable, which you can see by the capacity factor. As you take a look at the distribution assets, let me repeat it. We're talking here about higher volumes and the increase was higher in our region of distribution than for the entire country. We're decreasing the network losses. But another aspect is also that the fact that there's been so much wind, which was good for renewable energies. Sometimes it turns out that the winds were too strong, and those violent phenomena and quite numerous phenomena meant that especially the SAIFI ratio increased, SAIDI dropped, but not so much as we would like to have it. And if it turns out that the second semester of this year will not be calmer, and such stormy phenomena might recur, we might be running the risk of that the ratios defined by ERO might be slightly surpassed. I don't know what the situation is in the other groups, but I believe that they also might be running a similar risk. That's where the effects are largely dependent on our work. The connection time, here we are talking about a significant decrease. As for capital expenditures, they are lower than in the previous year, which slightly also stems from the setup of the capex. We're waiting for the work on our most important investments, Opole and Turów. We're waiting for the finalization of the most important stages and the final settlement of them. In distribution, a large proportion of the work related to the connection of new recipients, the modernization of the grid in low and medium voltage, and the conditions in Q1 meant that the works started a little bit later, and this also translated into a slightly smaller consumption of the money available for capex. In terms of renewable energies, the expenditure actually only relates to the maintenance of the existing assets. A brief outlook towards the entire year. Actually, here we're talking about the second half of the year. And from our latest meeting, since our latest meeting, we've known the amount of the annual settlement of the LCTs for 2016. That's 276 million zlotys, which is roughly in line with our expectations. We're expecting the final calculation, which should appear by the end of August, and currently we will not be conveying any comments from us because that's subject to the arbiter's decision. We don't want to speak beforehand, so we're maintaining our prospects for conventional power generation. We're also maintaining our prospects for the second important segment, which is the distribution. However, we can see a better situation in the trading segment, as we mentioned also before, the previous time, the policy of watching the margins rather than the sales volumes is, in our view, bringing its effects. We can see it by the better results of the trading segment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation. We'll give the floor over to you, ladies and gentlemen. To start with, to you convened here in this room, so please ask any questions you might have. Morning, Paweł Puchalski, BZWBK. Can you hear me? I have one question, because what I'm missing is the information about your important acquisition, which is the share in PGG. The results are not as best as you could expect. And could you please introduce me and us into what's going on there, what results you can expect in the ensuing quarters? Indeed. As probably in no other presentation, we have not shown any specific data on PGG, because it's only a company that we have a limited impact upon. That's why we don't have such capacities to control their results. Therefore, we're not presenting their results because we have no impact upon this. So I don't remember today the most recent results of the company, so I'm not in a position of answering. I'm not in a position to answer your question. Kozielski, JP Morgan's. About coal, as regards the outlook for the, regarding the coal price for next year, what can you see with regard to the market? By saying that the market is already starting to perceive a shortage of the market, that the spot prices are going up. Can you expect, do you expect any major increases in the coal prices next year? How do you perceive it? We have a long-term contract which is still binding throughout 2018. So from in our point of view, our contract covers the entire year. So we have no information about the changes in the prices. So let me be more specific. There is such a thesis that the heaps of coal that were transferred from the balance sheets of the mines to the balance sheets of Polish Energy, that it's starting to lose its calorific value. Would you confirm this thesis? We can see no physical shortages. We are not aware of any physical shortages of fire. And as regards the settlements, we are settling it with regard to the actual calorific value rather than the shortages or decreases in the calorific value. So I don't quite understand the value, but coal loses its parameters over time. Yes, of course it does when it stays on the heap. But what's important for us is what we are reporting to our installations, and the fact that it's lying about somewhere on a heap in Silesia. That's one thing. But we are paying for the specific calorific value. Okay, so as regards So would you venture to present any outlook for the electricity prices? Mr. Wojtowicz said that the prices might go up slightly because of the limitations, increase in the demand. Would you have any outlook regarding the price levels next year? Well, if the outlook regarding the price next year would be the liquid exchange market, we've seen it for a long time, as we presented in one of the first slides, that as the price has increased over the first quarter. And if the summer period is not slightly more liquid in the exchange, well, we'll see what will happen starting with September, and we will see which prices will follow, what sort of prices we will be able to see. In the banned product for the next year. Right now, it is above 160 zlotys. And as regards the power market, what is the status here? When can we expect the implementation of the power market? Have there been any, when can we expect the first auctions? Any changes here? We expect the first auctions next year. For the power available when, as of when, we'd like it to be for 2021. But the entire process of coordination with the European Commission is probably still in progress. So this is only our wishful thinking regarding what we would like this power market to look like. Thank you. I understand. And the last question, as regards the planned finalization of the EDF transaction, which date can we expect? January 2018. Is it still in place? We assumed that we would take it over by the end of this year, the latest. We'd like this to happen earlier. However, as we mentioned today, it's not entirely under our control. We need to obtain the appropriate consents from the Ministry of Energy and the Antitrust Office, and only then we will be able to talk about the takeover. Will this transaction also end up at the Competition Committee in Brussels or not? Not in my opinion. As far as I know, it will not. Thank you very much. Morning, Robert Maj-Potoma. I'd like to ask about the power auctions. The new units in Opole and Turów, do you think they will be able to run in the auctions for the new power or the existing one? Or how it will be perceived? It will all depend on the way that the power market will be shaped, which regulations will be in place. Of course, we would like this to be part of this, but we have to wait for the final regulations, and then we will be able to determine whether it's going to be this way or another. Okay. And as regards to the renewable segment, and the fact that the changes in the assets are feasible, could we restore the value that was written off in the wind farms last year? And what exactly does the increase in the outlook for the stem from? Because I understand that this stems from partly from the act which is supposed to be implemented combined with the price of the green certificates. But when exactly will this happen? How should you perceive it? I think we're talking about the change rather than an increase. Well, I think there's a year-on-year increase in the trade. So the question is about the result. Are you asking about the results or about the asset values? As I understand, the gentleman asked about the write-off. Okay, so if you're talking about a reversal of the write-offs, the question is, if we want to bore everyone, well, I could do it because it's a purely accounting entry. A couple of years back, following the changes to the group structure, the company Obrót Trade Company, which was the holder of distribution company, it gave the shares over to the upper tier, to PGE SA. Then the impairment charge was made to this. In PGE SA's books, we're still talking about the individual financials, not the consolidated financial statements. And now, since better results at PGE Obrót SA appeared, we ourselves, along with the auditor, have concluded that the accounting standards require from us to have another look at the value of the shares of PGE Obrót SA, and we have concluded that owing to the better results and the better prospects, the value has increased. And since we have come to such conclusions, the IASs require from us that the previous write-off should be reversed. Well, whether it makes sense for you or for the investors, it's up to everyone's decision. I think it's neutral from the investor's point of view because it all ends up on the individual financials level, but such are the IAS requirements, and we had to do it. And the next question was about the increase in the results in the trade segment. Let me repeat it. The focus on the margin, where we gave up several, well, maybe not several, but the largest customers whose bargaining power meant that we sold to them at a zero margin or a negative margin just to be able to win some volumes. This is one of the factors, and the other factor is the decrease of the green certificates. Also, lower costs for the trade segment, while maintaining the previous price, meant that we're disclosing better results. One more question about the atomic power plant. Do you think you'd be able to build it, or do you think you'd be able to do it from the power market or under a different formula? Whether we're supposed to be doing it from the power market or under a different formula. The question is about what the power market would look like. As of today, the atomic power plant is our strategic option. Whether we will be doing this, we will see any moment now. We keep analyzing the environment and checking the economic viability of our investments, and in line with our strategy, we said that we would be dealing with this rather towards 2020. As of today, the project is underway, the preparatory work is underway, and when the time to make a decision comes, we'll be able to answer your question. So we're talking about 3 years before anything can happen. Well, everything, the project is underway, something is happening. Still, it doesn't mean that we've suspended all our activities for the period of 3 years. The project is underway. All the works are being processed in line with the schedule, but whether we will be using this option, as I said, depends on many factors. Grzegorz Wilkowski, Insignis. I know you're always reluctant to forecast the prices due to your market position. Maybe I would ask the question about the trend, because in 2018 there will be a new power, Opole, also probably Kozienice, before Wrocław entered this year. So there are new units, and the switch-offs would be only slight, so it will be an expectation of some pressure due to the higher supply. And there's also one question regarding the adjustment to the BAT requirements. So my question is, how do you see the balance? Would the new units have an impact on the pressure? So I would mean that there should be quite some energy surplus. Would you comment on that? But also the demand keeps growing, but still not at such a rate as the number of units available, new units available. Well, it all depends on several factors. The first factor is whether in a given year, in a given period, there will be much wind or not much wind. Then it will see whether this will be impacting the fact whether the units will be used or not. So it's like fortune telling whether there's enough power or too much or too little. Well, there will be some switch-offs. We expect that there will be some switch-offs, but we don't expect that the balancing figure for the country would be at stake. And as regards the switch-offs for the BAT requirements or maintenance works, how long can it take? Well, we cannot talk about a typical situation because each installation is different. Each one is prepared in a different way. Some of the installations only require slight expenditures, capital expenditures to meet the BAT requirements. Some of them require a deeper modernization. So it all depends on what there is to do, what is supposed to be done in a given installation. So you cannot talk about a switch off for 3 weeks, 1 month, half a year. There is no typical unit, so to say. So from the perspective of our assets in Bełchatów, we can talk about 3 to 4 months per unit. That's how it is estimated, but this is still very preliminary. So please don't treat it that each unit will be switched off for 3 to 4 months. Thank you. So I think we'll go online for the moment. We have a question regarding PGG. The question is whether PGE expects other expenditures connected with capital injections in PGG, and if so, yeah, when? The question is simple. We don't expect any such expenditures. Thank you. So part of the questions have already been consumed by our questions asked here in this room. So unless those convened here have no other questions to ask in public, then we'd like to thank you very much for your attendance, for such a numerous turnout. And you're all invited to watching our results and in a participation in the presentation of our results in November. Thank you very much and see you again. Thank you.